In this example, we want to graph three relations A, B, and C, which are each given in roster method. So taking part A first, we see that here we have some restriction on the x value for the coordinates, but none on the y value. So here we would say that y is free to be any value. While x is not exactly free, x can be any value strictly less than 4. And so if we want to plot this, because x cannot equal 4, we're going to indicate this with a dashed line. So dashed line means exclude values on that line. So x4 is over here. We're going to put a dashed vertical line through that. And now what we know is that x needs to be less than 4. So it's going to be all values to the left of this line. So that would be all of these values over here, and we have no restriction on what y can be, so we have no restriction on how far up or down we go. So we get this entire shaded region to the left of 4, and again, this dashed line that we have in red means that the points that fall on this dashed line, these points are excluded from that relation. Okay, now let's move on to part B. In part B, we now have a relation where we have restrictions on both x and y. So here we have all values of x and y such that x is strictly less than 4, and the y coordinates of these points are greater than or equal to 1 and strictly less than 3. So first, taking into account the restriction on x being less than 4, we see that here x values less than 4. And so here these points are going to be excluded. So this means we're going to use a dashed line for that restriction. For y, we have 2. And so on the one hand, we know that y values must be greater than or equal to 1. Okay, and so these are going to be included. So we're going to use a solid line to indicate we want to include those points. And we also need y values, the y coordinates, to be strictly less than three. And because these are excluded, we get a dashed line here. So putting each of these boundaries in red, we have values must be less than 4. So here's x equals 4. Let's put a dashed line, vertical line through that. We have a solid line that y is equal to 1. And then we have a dashed line that says y is less than 3. Okay, so here's our boundaries, and we need to be careful. Do I shade in stuff here or over here? And so to check where we're actually going to shade in, over here, we want to be less than 4. So that means we're going to go to the left of this line. So at least I know I need to be on this side. We're going to go greater than 1. So we're going to be above this line. And we need to be less than 3. So we're going to be below that line. So that puts me right in this region between the blue and the green line. And again, because we have a dashed line for this boundary, and this boundary, points that sit along this boundary are excluded, where points that sit along this line we would include in here. And it's never a bad idea to just check when you're done that do the points in your shaded region satisfy these conditions. So for example, here's a point at 3, 2. Well, x equals 3 is less than 4. Y equals 2 falls between these regions, so that looks good. Picking a point out here like 0, 6. Well, x equals 0 is okay, but y equals 6 falls above 3, so yes, we would want to exclude that. And now let's move on to the last part, C. In part C, we now are looking at the relation over here, where now we have one restriction on x that it must be strictly bigger than 1, and we have one restriction on y that it must be less than or equal to 2. And so to indicate the restriction on x in red, this one over here, we see that x must be strictly greater than 1. And so we're going to exclude those points. So this is going to be a dashed line. At x equals 1. We have the condition on y, which I'll indicate in blue. And so here y must be less than or equal to two. So this is going to be a solid line because we're going to include these values. So starting with the first restriction on x in red, we put a dashed line through x is equal to 1. That vertical line there. And for the second condition, we put a solid line through y equals 2. That would be right here. And now we want to pick the values for x that are greater than 1. So we're going to go on this side and less than or equal to 2. So that means down below the blue line. So we want to go to the right of the red line and below the blue line. And that puts us right over here. All these values in this black shaded area over here.